Thank you all. Thanks for hanging around for the last presentation. One of the good things about being last is you get to look at everyone else's presentation and pick little bits from it. The bad thing is they've stolen pretty much all of my talking points, so I'll do my best to sort of focus on some of the main items that I want to address today, which is common pitfalls and things that you can do to de-risk the certification process. So just like Henry J. Lyons, we've got our own sort of stages for certification. I think they had 1 to 6, we've 1 to 7. We're going to be looking at 3 to 7 today. That's kind of how we break it up in terms of design team engagement, the commencement process, the construction stage, the kind of construction stage reoccurring, and then the completion stage. So I'm going to go through risks for each of the 3 to 7. So starting with kind of our stage 3, which is effectively design team engagement and building the inspection plan. This is your, I suppose, first interaction with a design team. The design has been going on in the background. You're approaching completion of that. You're looking at lodging a commencement notice in sort of the coming weeks and months. So the assigned certifier will get involved in this stage. And one of the first things we will do is and audit the design information. So as some of the speakers earlier have noted, there's a minimum standard for the drawing information that goes on to the BCMS. So when we request the drawings, the first thing what we're doing is using that information to understand the building, just to see how it's going to be broken down, what work packages are involved in it, who is responsible for designing what specialists do we have. But again, in terms of level of completeness, there is a minimum bar that we need to achieve for a commencement notice. So part of it is auditing that information and see, do we have everything? Do we have everything? Are we missing anything in terms of some of the kind of the late design items, which would be sort of M&E? After that as well, one of the parts of that audit is reviewing drawing titles and statuses. So we've seen a lot of projects kicked back for revised information or invalidated because out of the 50 to 60 drawings or more that you would be uploading, there is a drawing within that pack that says this is issued for planning, or this is a draft, or this is issued for comments, or this is issued for tender. None of those are acceptable. They will get knocked back, and they have been knocked back as well on projects we've been on. So as best we can, we try and audit that, although, it's not our responsibility to be auditing it. I suppose we'll set out initially at the very beginning what the drawing standard should be. It should either be issued for commencement notice, issued for construction, something like that shows that the design is well advanced and can be used for a commencement notice upload. Part L and Part F information is sometimes something that isn't considered, something we have to ask and push for lodging a commencement notice. So we do ask for it, we do push for it. We just need to be demonstrating how we intend in complying with Part L, as the previous speaker kind of ran through. If there's an EAP or a DEEP in draft format or a provisional BER, that will be good enough, or it could be a Part L compliance report as well, which kind of breaks down how that building is eventually going to comply with Part L. Same with ventilation calculations. So without those, I suppose we don't know if we're relying on passive ventilation, active ventilation, or a mix of both, depending on the various parts of the building. So we need to set that out. That's something that we do request early and upfront as well. At this stage as well, where we as a company, and I presume other people have various and different methods to capturing this information, but we send out a BCMS questionnaire to the design certifier to collate. This is effectively all the bits of information that are required to be inputted into the BCMS. So we need that as early as possible so that we can draft the BCMS application. Some of the pitfalls and risks associated with that are any errors that are in that BCMS questionnaire. If they go on to the BCMS, if there is an issue down the line and this project gets audited for whatever reason, whether it's a Section 11 or there is a failure, and they're going back and looking at this information, any errors in here could cause you issues in relation to incorrect planning references, whether in terms of modular buildings, if you haven't specified that certain aspects of this building are modular, and in reality it was built with modular construction. So it's very important that the accuracy of that information is correct. If it's a 7-day notice, the project details as well in that form, that the wording of that has to align exactly with the 7-day notice, or again, you could be looking at revised information or invalidation. So that the wording, the project description has to align exactly with the 7-day notice. So there's a bit of coordination there to do with the fire consultant. And then in the wording as well, although we'll take a first draft, we'll generally have some input into it in terms of how that project is going to be worded on the BCMS. It is important as best you can to put in information like grey box, white box, or shell and core, or Cat A or Cat B fit out now at commencement stage, so that when you get to the completion stage and you're handing over a shell and core or a grey box, that there isn't I suppose, a misunderstanding from a building control perspective, expecting that you were going to hand over a finished product. What you're actually handing over is a shell and core or kind of a white box finish. So getting that into the wording of the commencement notice early on is very important. Stage 4 then, the commencement notice stage itself. So there's been previous speakers discussing the preliminary inspection plan. All I'll say is a generic inspection plan here should be avoided at all costs. It can mislead building control. Also, there is a requirement to identify all your design changes at the end. If what you're starting with is fairly generic and not exactly aligned with what you're building, just means you've more work at the very end, kind of defining those changes between commencement and completion. But again, if you have elements in there in your preliminary inspection plan that are generic, that are not relevant to the building, and there is an issue, and there is an audit from a building control perspective on the project as a whole, if there is something in that preliminary inspection plan that isn't in the final building, then it can cause problems, and we're aware of certain projects where that has been scrutinized. So what the preliminary inspection plan should be is accurate, but be a sort of a collaborative inspection plan between the assigned certifier and the design team. We generally do a draft, we get your input as designers, we'll top and tail it, and we'll make sure that it's accurate. In that document as well, this is how we do it. You can, obviously other people would do it differently, but we try and define the design responsibility here up front and early. So in a lot of cases, maybe the structural engineer or the architect is obviously responsible for the whole, but maybe not responsible for certain specific aspects of that design. It's important to flag that here from our perspective, so that we know that down the line that certification gap needs to be filled. Who are we going to be chasing for an ancillary cert, or is it going to be a specialist engaged by a subcontractor or subcontractor? So we try and define it at this stage as early as we can. In terms of ancillary design certificates then, some of the kind of pitfalls and risks here are it being signed by a director of the company. I think it was mentioned earlier as well. You will find the odd time where it's not signed by a director, or might be signed by the head of a certain department, but it is important that all these certs at commencement stage are signed by directors. We see some issues with UK-based design teams as well, where they're not registered with one of the professional bodies, and either they can look at some quick kind of membership options with the closest affiliated body, or we're looking at someone else signing on their behalf. Any specialists that we have early on, examples being like a piling designer specialist, we should be capturing ancillary certificates from them now. So it's been touched on, and I'll be touching on it again. So we have the SD for specialist designs pre-commencement. You have the SC for designs post-commencement. So anything here that's going to be designed or specialists that are appointed for design at this stage, we should be capturing an SD. As Ronan mentioned as well, at this stage we should be considering our BCAR strategy for this development. If it is a multi-phase sort of residential or a multi-phase residential commercial, we should be considering, okay, how are we actually going to be progressing with the commencement notices here, how many commencement notices, but also if we know at this stage this is going to be a multi-phase completion, we should be breaking that down now as best we can, just so we can communicate this with the local authority at the right time. There is requirements and strict requirements in some local authorities about this phasing, if it's known up front, to be baked into the fire cert and the DAC applications. Failure to do that may restrict your options for phasing down the line. And yeah, look, early engagement, as soon as you know how you're going to commence, as soon as you know what your strategy is for completion, we'd always be engaging building control as early as possible. So for complex multi-phase kind of developments, we'd be engaging with building control at this stage here before lodging a commencement notice. We'd be trying to spell out in broad terms what our strategy is here for this development. If your development here has a basement, multi-story basement, a bulk dig, just be mindful that bulk digs can trigger a commencement notice here as well. So there's interpretations out there that it's only a hole in the ground, it's not permanent works. There's other interpretations from local authorities' perspective that it does trigger a commencement notice. So that's when the bucket goes into the ground to dig your hole rather than you pouring your first section of concrete. Same goes for secant piles as well. If you're driving secant piles with the intention then of digging out afterwards, in some cases the piling itself can be the trigger for the commencement notice, and again, not the bulk dig or the foundations. The logic being if those secant piles are actually supporting your superstructure over, then they're effectively permanent works, even though at that stage they're there as a sort of a temporary work solution to facilitate the bulk dig. So having these conversations early will help de-risk everything. In terms of statutory forms then at commencement stage, so you'll have a 7-day notice or a standard commencement notice. Again, 7-day notice, as we know now from the previous presentations, the 7-day notice has a statutory declaration attached. So as the certificates themselves have to be signed by someone who's legally authorized to sign on behalf of the company. For the larger multinational companies we might be working with, sometimes that's very difficult to nail down that person. And again, there might be someone further down the chain who may be willing to sign, but it has to be someone with that legal authority. It has to be someone that in the event of a catastrophic failure will be able to stand in front of a judge and take responsibility, not someone further down the chain. And then that statutory declaration obviously needs to be signed by a practicing solicitor or a commissioner of oaths. Okay, then a BCAR compliance specification. We've heard this mentioned a couple of times here as well. The earlier you can get this across, the better in terms of de-risking the project. So we've heard a lot about ancillary cert requirements and other sort of requirements from designers and assigned certifiers. You need to bake that into the contract. If what you're asking is fair and correct and aligns with the practice notes, it should be baked into the contract themselves so that there's no issues further down the line. Even if it is baked in early, we're still finding lots and lots of problems, especially with the specialist ancillary certs, which I'll get to in a while. But again, that's something that you should consider getting across to the project manager and the client. So then you're at construction kickoff stage. Your first step really is sort of builder engagement and a good start. The kind of risks and pitfalls here are not engaging with the contract early and kind of outlining what your expectations are in relation to the BCAR process. So having a conversation up front about inspections. What are we looking? Having a look at the preliminary inspection plan. Having a conversation about a program and what inspections are going to be required initially, the format of those inspections as well. Is it checklists? Is it just photographs? Is it checklists and photographs? There's a minimum bar for us anyway. Checklists aren't evidence of anything. They're tick boxes. I think in the early days of Catalyst, we did accept checklists going back to 2015 and 16. We were hounding one particular contractor for a number of months looking for overdue checklists, and he turned around and said, look, I'm going to set some time aside this weekend, I'm going to do them. This is sort of 4 or 5 months after the fact. So basically his job was to tick boxes and hand them over. So we don't accept those now. Checklists are fine as long as they're accompanied with photographs and actual evidence. So setting that out early is good. Benchmarking and first of kinds as well, having that conversation about benchmarking high-risk installations, so doing a first of kind, install something with all the design team and specialists present first before you repeat that 100 times, which can lead sometimes to abortive work. Having conversations about issue remediation, so again, if something is, there will be hundreds, if not more, of issues on a large-scale project. That's all fine, but what should happen? There should be a process in terms of closing out those issues. It should be based on evidence again. If something is raised, you should have a photograph and a description. If it's going to be closed, it needs a photograph and a description as well to show that it's been remediated. And then having this conversation as well, ongoing about subcontractor appointments. So when you start the project, you don't know who's going to be appointed and for what. That'll kind of materialize as you go through the process, but it's important to keep on top of that as you go. So good and early collaboration and engagement is vital. I mean, you're going to be working with this team for 18, 24 months. It's important to get off to a good start. Just in terms then a bit more detail about the inspection plan and the risks and the pitfalls there as well, is that the frequency of what's going to be uploaded or what's been requested doesn't align with kind of the risk rating of the project or the work package. So it's all in the code of practice, note 4. It's in the code of practice, it's in practice note 4, and it's in the code of practice as well about a risk-based approach to inspections. So the higher the risk of the particular work package or the installation, then the more frequent that should be inspected. So if you're dealing with fire doors, if you're dealing with fire dampers, then the frequency of those inspections need to increase compared to something that's moderately kind of low risk. So that's all in practice note 4. That's the wording there in italic. So the actual number of inspections required for each work stage element is dependent on the builder's program. So how stretched out it is, or is it very, very compact? The importance of the elements, so how critical it is, again, if it's fire doors, fire dampers, elements of structure, transfer structures. The builder, I'm presuming that means the competence, so again, if someone has, let's say, not worked with a particular building form or type before, then you might want more inspections in relation to that, whereas if someone is very familiar with it and has lots of experience with it, then maybe that might reduce the frequency. Yeah, okay, then the contractor's QA process. Might be something for me, but it's always important to get a key point of contact, a single point of contact with a contractor. If you've got multiple people responsible for the same thing, then things are going to fall between the cracks. You're going to get delays, you're going to get issues, you're going to have reworks. So as best you can, get a key point of contact for BCAR engagement. We touched on the QA record format. Yeah, and then in terms of documentation as well, it kind of aligns with 3 of them in terms of the initial conversation, the inspection plan and the QA records. It's certain high-risk installations have multiple stages of installation, and so what we don't want is a finished photograph of a fire door, finished and complete. That's not evidence of compliant workmanship. That's not evidence of a compliant fire door. You need to see evidence of the first fix with the gaps in place, with all your screw fixings to the side. Your second fix will be your drop seals and your ironmongery and intumescent pads if they're there. Your threshold gaps. So there's multiple stages to various installations, and it's important that the inspections that are uploaded align with that as well as best you can. Same with fire dampers. There are things that are not done in one go, and therefore the inspection should align with the stages of the installation. Benchmarking, I've touched on it. It's not in the code of practice. Okay, it's not in any of the practice notes. But it's something that benefits all the stakeholders and not just the ACs. So, the goal here is to demonstrate compliant workmanship of high-risk work packages, particularly early. Okay, it reduces the risk of abortive work. If you spot a problem after they've installed that 50 times and you say, actually, I've got a problem here, this isn't installed correctly, you arrange for a benchmark to be created by the contractor, attended by the relevant design discipline, any specialists or suppliers. You look at the installation, you make your comments, you make any changes, and then from that point on, you have a benchmark record that you can rinse and repeat. It's been touched on the previous conversations as well about design team inspections and specialist inspections. So, every main designer is signing an AI and an EI, and it has to be based on something. You can't, just receive an EI and have no record of that person's attendance to site. Again, it's down to risk rating. It's dependent on the start and end date of the works relating to your discipline, but there should be frequent inspections. For a kind of a standard risk kind of project, we'd be, looking at a fortnightly inspection from a design team member, potentially stretching to kind of a month if there's kind of delays or periods where there's not a lot of activity. But just in terms of specialists here, like we're seeing a lot of, modular and off-site build kind of products and systems coming into the market, which is great. But specialists that have design responsibility for high-risk elements like balconies and precast elements, they need to be inspecting as well, because the people who are installing it may not be 100% competent in relation to what the design criteria actually were or what the design assumptions were. So if you have prefabricated balconies, if you have a precast frame structure, it is absolutely vital that you get those designers on site inspecting the works. During the stage, you might come across some Section 11s as well during the construction stage. In terms of a risk and a pitfall here, in our experience, if you get one of those, you drop absolutely everything and you give it your 100% of your attention. Do not send something back that is designed just to buy you time, or do not send something back that responds to half or part of that Section 11. Our experience is you drop everything, you give it the greatest amount of detail, you have meetings and coordinations and workshops, and you go back with a full and comprehensive response. If you don't, then you will get probably more site attendances, more attention on your project, and other things can materialize from that. So give it the full attention it deserves. Non-compliances. We don't accept, we have a system anyway and others obviously have their own systems, but when we are brought onto projects as third-party auditors, we do see that there are projects out there that deal with non-compliances via Excel spreadsheets or, just Outlook or, minute notes. Not really suitable in 2025 and going forward. Digital systems like Procore and all those others every contractor has a version of that, and they should be used for capturing non-compliances. We should have a photograph of the issue and a description of what the actual issue is. We should have closeout evidence showing that that's been closed and remediated. If you're dealing with Excels and Outlooks and verbals, I don't know how you can certify a building not knowing that there's potentially errors and latent defects kind of hidden within that building. We've touched on design changes as well in terms of significant changes. I suppose our lessons learned here and our risks and pitfall is a misunderstanding of what significant means. Okay, we would have probably assumed that if you're going from an in situ precast concrete frame to, an in situ concrete frame to a precast concrete frame, that could be captured in the design change log. That's not the case. That is a definition of a significant change. That is something that should have been notified to building control during the construction stage, should have accompanying design certificates. And so the term significant design change really isn't defined anywhere, but I'll give you that as one example of something that absolutely is. Other design changes, you're going to get them during the course of a project. Things are going to change, things are going to move. If they're not significant, they're not fundamental, all the design team members should be collating a design change log as they go, not at the very end where half the changes you've made have been forgotten. So that's something we encourage design team members to do. If something moves and changes, there's altered, the specification changes, make a record of that, because that is one of the items that goes up onto the BCMS at completion stage. Critical documents. Okay, so that's a list of everything that's going to be needed for certification of that building. So at a point during the construction stage, you should be looking at defining that as early as possible, but it is a live document, I think, as someone mentioned. You should be trying to spell out exactly what you're going to need in terms of ancillary certificates, but also test certificates as well, and any specialists as well. So you won't know that until all the subcontractors have been appointed, and then you won't know if those subcontractors are actually sub-appointing out the designs. So you need to be, keep on top of that as you go. But there is an issue out there in relation to design-only specialists. Okay, so it's been touched on by nearly everyone. I'll probably do it again because it is something that's taken up a disproportionately amount of time over the last couple of months across various projects, having the same discussions over and over again. So there has been recent CIF guidance. I've spoken to the CIF at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. I appreciate there is issues and concerns out there that they have in relation to the wording of some of the ancillary certificates, in relation to some design team members asking for a CS cert as well as the specialist certs for design, supply and install. So they had concerns and they had issues. I think there was an agreement there that something needed to change. There did need to be some updates. Practice notes are, almost 10 years old. There's a lot of lessons learned now over the past period. We could do with a revision. But what's happened instead is there's a kind of a unilateral kind of decision to state to their members that specialist design search shouldn't be provided in projects. So none at all. What we're seeing on some projects is an offer of a bespoke ancillary cert. So we'll create a specialist ancillary cert ourselves that looks sort of the same but is different, and we'll sign that, and then amending clauses, taking them out, or crossing them out. So we're into a realm now where we kind of had a standard, we had practice notes to reference, we had template ancillary certs. We're now in an era where contractors are potentially offering you something weird and wonderful and bespoke. It would be better if we could all get together in a room between all those working body members, working group members like the Engineers Ireland and ACAI and Society of Chartered Engineers, or IAI and the CIF, just discuss what their differences are, discuss what problems they have, and discuss what wording probably needs to be tweaked and what clauses need to be adjusted or what examples in practice note 2 need to be adjusted. That would save us all a great deal of time and bother, because it seems that everyone in industry is dealing with the same problem over and over and over again, and we need that certainty to be brought back. Just a note on mid-project changes and changes of use. So I think it was Henry J. Lyons mentioned new floors will require a new commencement notice with separate documentation. Any change of use of part or a floor of a building will require a new commencement notice. Significant changes can require a new FSC and DAC, and it's good to be involved in those conversations as an Assigned Certifier, because what do you know, it's a significant change and a not so significant change where you can capture it in a design change log. You need to be involved in those conversations early on as well. And ultimately what your fire cert and DAC need to do at completion is align with what actually is built. So if there has been significant changes and movements and now your FSC and DAC don't align with what you've actually built, then you've a potential certification issue down the line. Last stage then is your completion stage. So I think it was Ronan was mentioning about pre-notification versus kind of standard notification. So local authorities, in our experience from talking to them, would prefer a standard completion. They don't want pre-notified completions. They would rather you just engage with them early, explain what your expected completion date is, give them updates as you go, rather than going down the pre-notification route. In our experience, the pre-notification dates are always too optimistic and almost never met. You're always changing a pre-notification date. And sometimes they can be used as sort of a contractual tool to hold the builder to a particular date. But if it's not achievable, it's not achievable. And there's no point kind of rushing to a date where the pressures of meeting that date will result in a sort of reduced quality and a rise in the number of remedial actions that are being raised because they're just going so fast to meet a date that is unachievable in the first place. Ronan touched and it did a very, very good presentation on phasing. So my notes here on phasing are a little bit broader, right? So I would have touched that as best you can early on. They should be baked into your fire certs and your DACs. But what will happen is you'll be halfway through a project and a client will decide he needs to phase it for whatever reason. But the one thing we try to emphasize to everyone in the design team is whatever you're looking to phase and hand over first has to be effectively certifiable as a standalone, as if the rest of the development was never built or mothballed, that phase should be able to be certified, be compliant with all the building regs from A to M and be standalone. So here, building control engagement is just absolutely vital. So we would always do a completion strategy report, just explain to them with drawings and descriptions what the phase is going to look like, what's in, what's out. Here's a red line drawing. Not for building control, but for the design team and the client as well. What is sometimes missed is these part-time access routes. When you're complying A to M, for whatever reason, M seems to be the one that's kind of forgotten. But you need to be able to enter that building site, or sorry, that site or that development from the main gates and access a dwelling or a commercial unit, whatever it is, as if the whole development was finished. Those access routes need to be completely done. That includes your external lighting. So if you're rushing to get a phase done, some of your external lighting standards mightn't be in place. So it's something to be mindful of. Same with crossing points, set down areas, all that stuff. I'll have a slide in a minute now. So remote basement plant rooms and external plant rooms and bin stores, they're always something to consider when you're looking at a phase completion as well. So if you're looking to hand over if you have 2 blocks over a shared basement, you want to hand over one particular block, then everything in the basement that is related to that block needs to be handed over as well. And that might not result in a very clean handover of a basement. That is a generic example of one where on the right-hand side you have a building over, on the left-hand side you have a separate building over. You're looking to hand over the right-hand side first, so you're going to hand over the section of the basement below that. But up here in the top left, you've got water tank rooms, sprinkler tank rooms, you've switch rooms, all these plant rooms that will be feeding the building you're handing over. That means they need to be included in your phase 1 handover. And if you're including them, then you need to access them and you need to escape from them, which then means you need to look at your escape routes as well from there. And if that's the case, then you're probably looking at alternative escape routes and not just your first phase building. Takes a lot of time to even get to that point, right? Just to consider all the mechanical and electrical considerations, all your fire considerations, fire signage considerations, and all that needs to be done and completed and presented to building control for discussion. They can say yay or nay to that particular proposal if they wish, but what you should be doing is trying to explain to them as best you can, we've got this under control, we know exactly what we're doing, and there's nothing here that isn't going to be certified or certifiable. Yeah, and in that particular example as well, we had to include some escape routes through the second block from basement up to ground floor and out. So we were actually, the phase 1 was building 1 in the basement, but also from ground floor or basement floor to ground floor. Some of those second block cores had to be handed over as well, which are up there in green in B2 and B5. So the whole strategy had to bring in extra escape routes because of the travel distances. Cause and effect as well is something to consider. So cause and effect, if you hadn't anticipated on phasing a building early on, you would a cause and effect document which explained what happened when the fire alarm went off. You're now cutting a section of that building off the phase 1 completion. You need to make sure that cause and effect is still valid. It probably will need to be amended. It needs to be a standalone document, again, specific to a phase. In terms of critical documents, so everyone is aware of ancillary certs that we require at a completion stage. We also need elements like test certificates for gas, for electricity, for ventilation, for sprinkler tanks. We'll need the life safety system certificates, the 4-part certs for emergency lighting and fire detection, lux level verification, especially where we've got external steps. It's always an issue in relation to lux level measurements, so they'll have to be tested at night in advance of the handover to make sure that we're in compliance with the DAC report. Door forces. If you have to certify a building that didn't have issues with door forces at the very end, 30 newtons for all doors on a DAC access route, it's quite difficult to achieve. You need to have the Part B and Part M compliance. The door needs to close, but also needs to be opened with a maximum force of 30 newtons. A particular issue if you've got smoke extract systems in that development as well. If you're sucking air nearby when you activate the smoke extract system, you can have issues in terms of exceeding that 30 newtons. So it's something to be mindful of. You need to find that balance somehow. Also items like pressure flow, hydrant flow and pressure tests. So if they invent a fire, you need to be able to fight that fire with a suitable water flow. All that's going to be defined in your fire cert application, but do you actually have those flow and pressure tests on site? Should be done before you actually you should have an idea of what water supply you get before you start the development, but you just need to verify it before completion. Damper drop tests are another obviously one. It's a high risk work package. You need to make sure that those dampers will function as designed in the event of a fire. Wrapping up then in terms of ancillary certificates, I touched on the specialist certificates. I'm hoping that's relatively clear between all of us speaking about it. I'd urge every one of you to have a conversation as a group and have a conversation with your professional bodies. There has to be a coming together on this particular issue. You can see the commonality between us all here. It's something that does need to be addressed. Good idea to do a gap analysis before you finish as well. So, again, even on projects where I think I've got a great handle on this, I wasn't aware that someone has subcontracted something along the way. And maybe that subcontractor has subcontracted the design along the way. So undertaking that gap analysis at key points, especially prior to completion, is very, very important to make sure that there are no gaps to certification. In terms of ancillary certs as well, the wording of those CS and CSS certs, so usually go with design, supply and install, or supply and install. That's something that is constantly having to be corrected, so issue out a draft if you can. So everything could probably fall into that category: supply and install, design, supply and install, just to make sure that the wording of the certs actually align with what was done and what's being certified. Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 to be filled out correctly. The amount of times I see Schedule 1 saying architectural drawings. Yeah, so basically they're saying, okay, just generically architectural drawings is what I used as the basis for my installation. It's not good enough. Which architectural drawings? So there's plenty of space there to add a series of architectural drawings, for example, or you can put in an annex, but it should be clear what you relied on to do your work, and then you're certifying on the basis of that. It protects you as well. If you put down something, then that's what you're tied to in terms of this is what I was given and this is what I built and this is what I'm certifying and nothing else. Schedule 2 as well needs to be very, very clear what you did in terms of your design responsibility and what your output is. It is forgotten from time to time to fill it in at all or to fill it in correctly. It needs to be very clear what the output of that design was. The obvious ones, all documents signed and dated. 10% of probably stuff we get isn't signed or isn't dated at the end. They don't generally go up onto BCMS anyway, but they can be requested after the lodgement, and they could be relied upon later further down the line as well. So they should be signed and they should be dated. Another important one just to finish up on is this snag versus remedial action. There are pressures to get a building over the line when you're at that stage, and there is always a temptation to suggest that something is a snag that can be completed post-completion rather than a remedial action. So it's important to be very firm here. If it's something that relates to life safety systems, Part M access, if it is a building regulations issue, needs to be completed before you all sign your certs and before I'd sign my CCC cert, because you have no guarantee that that's going to be remediated and remediated properly after you've walked away and signed your CCC. So Another aspect of that is when you lodge your CCC, whether you do or not get an inspection from building control. Even on some projects I've had a drive-by where if there's a lot of work taking place at your completion stage after you've lodged it, they'll just give you a phone call saying you're clearly not done yet. There's men on with hard hats and high-vis vests working away on site. There's building materials stored in the common areas. You've harris fencing up. You're not done. So when you lodge, you are effectively done. When you get validated, it effectively means whether or not it's going to happen, a member of the public can occupy that building that very day after you get your validation cert. Or the way it's been communicated to us from building control is that's our level of expectation. Yeah, you could be painting. Yes, you could be landscaping, but you can't be in there doing fire doors and fire dampers and paving. So it's that level of completeness conversation needs to be a frank conversation prior to completion. And that's me. Thank you very much.